And now moving on to my most favorite named location of all of Chapter 2, we are going on to the Id Ascendant. The build up to the Id Ascendant can come in a variety of ways, but man, is the payoff once again going to be a strange one, because really it comes down to how you present what is going on with this location and how your players are going to receive what you put down. The Id Ascendant is a Nautiloid ship that crashed down a week ago and is currently nestled in the mountains here. And what's odd about this one is the fact that most Nautiloid ships are controlled by mind flayers. This one in particular is being controlled by gnome mind flayers, which is both hilarious and scary. As we can see here, the Id Ascendant has crashed all the way up in the spine of the world, and it is pretty much close to one of the locations in Chapter 3 here, Sunblight. We'll be getting that in a future video. But from what it looks like here is, if you haven't already done the Id Ascendant quest, and your players are being told to go to the Sunblight, it looks like there's a possibility that they could somehow stumble across the Id Ascendant, and that would be extra creepy if they came across this thing and didn't know anything about it. But for the instances of this case, we're going to be talking about quests that can get your players to this crashed ship. For the tall tale to get us intrigued into the Id Ascendant, we have this line that says, "Did you see the weird comet that fell out of the sky a week ago? It went down in the mountains south of the 10 towns, not too far away." Wrong, very far away. Look at that. Just from Dugan's Hole, it's like a 12-mile-ish trek. Disgusting. Since then, some folk have been receiving mental messages in a language they can't make out. I think the comet might have something to do with that, and I bet you could find it easily, even in this weather. Of all the tall tales so far, this one is definitely one of the weakest ones. It is just pretty much blatantly saying, oh, a comet fell from the sky, and now people are receiving mental images? You're already telling your players that it's aliens. That's way just... I don't like that spin at all, honestly. For a quest to get us to the Id Ascendant, we have Distress Signal. Basically, what's going on here is several people are receiving telepathic signals, and this is keeping them up, and they're saying, hey, you know, we hear that there is some type of signal, and it's leading us over there. Why don't you go ahead and check it out? What's really odd about this quest is we get some information on every single one of these people. We get Velda Star Spirit, a stocky, paranoid 30-year-old trapper with extropia. We have Nars Beldrun, a tall, heavy-set 33-year-old shipwright from Targos who complains about everything. Telvester Hanging Bell, a 25-year-old man from a well-off merchant family in Neverwinter looking to escape his responsibilities. And Casca Lang, a 30-year-old author writing a mystery novel about a series of fictional murders in 10 towns. Why couldn't they give us this awesome information in the actual towns? Why would, you know, just having literally a single sentence about a character, you know, and just telling us their age, their looks, and their personality, that goes an extremely long way to role-playing characters. But the thing is why would we need this information from 4 random people if they're just going to say, hey, go here, do this? That should have been saved for other locations in the book, whatever. So while I did state that Id Ascendant is in fact my favorite location in all of Chapter 2, unfortunately I'm not really a fan of the lead up to the Id Ascendant. What I propose is that at some point during your adventures, one of your players comes across a psionic crystal. One of your players may have already attuned themselves, or at least even found a psionic crystal if they went to the gem mine in Tourmaline for that quest. But the thing is not every single person does every single quest. They may not have taken that gem. They may have just thrown that away. They may not be attuned to it. So what I propose is at some point during the course of the player's adventures, one of them finds one of these psionic crystals. And if you know your group well enough and you know that they're not going to take the bait on getting a psionic crystal because they are paranoid or maybe they don't like things that are foreign, then just have it where if they're staying at an inn, then all of a sudden they wake up and receive this psychic imagery, and they wake up in a cold sweat and look around and realize that they're clutching a psionic crystal in their hand. Then they're left questioning, where did this crystal come from? Why am I receiving these mental images? What is this noise? I don't recognize the language because most people aren't going to recognize the language. And that can really be this odd buildup of maybe there's someone around town, purposely giving away psionic crystals to make people go insane. Maybe one of your players actually found it and they're going crazy and they don't even remember that they had it in the first place. There's a lot of things you can do with that. And I think having one of the players being the ones receiving these psionic images and telling them to go somewhere is way better than just having some random NPC show up and say, "Hey, I'm hearing some stuff. Why don't you go over there and check it out for me?" Because that sounds like a trap. It sounds way too hokey. I think having one of the players be the actual driving force behind going out and exploring is way better. Another thing to consider is the fact that it states here in the book that the Id Ascendant crashed a week ago. But the thing is, it says a week ago. What is that refer to in regards to the game? What you could do here is you could have it where your players see this thing crash down. And maybe they do think it is a meteor. And maybe someone says, "Oh, hey, a meteor crashed down. There could be some good minerals in there. How about we send a mining expedition?" And then the mining expedition goes out there to go retrieve it, and they don't return. Or if your players immediately see a so-called meteor crash down, and they don't need to accompany some miners, or they don't need to hear about a group of miners going missing, maybe they just go out and explore it themselves because a meteor crashing down, that's awesome. We also get a reference to the Nautiloid ship crashing down in the Goodmead quest. The Very Big's girlfriend that's showing up has a bunch of metal from the ship that crashed down. So maybe you could say that some more of the metal crashed down. Maybe there's some metal scattered all about the Ten Trail and around Dugan's Hole and around Goodmead and maybe even around Bryn Shander. You could definitely lead a cookie trail of weird metallic composite just all over the place. There is a lot of ways you can do a build-up to getting your players to the Id Ascendant, but there's only so much build-up you can do that doesn't give away the fact that it's aliens. I personally don't like giving it away that it's aliens because that is just way too obvious. But, if you want your players to get into that campy kind of game, that's awesome. And if you want your players to be totally, feeling like they're about to go into the thing moment, then that's awesome. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the location so we can see what we're working with here and see what your players will be going up against. For the beginning area of the Nautiloid Down section, we get some really good information about what's going on here. This ship crashed down, and it currently has 5 alive residents, 3 of which are gnome squidlings, which are these piddly little creatures that really can't do much, and all they care about is eating. And it states here, funnily enough, that basically they're just hungry cats. And the other 2 creatures aboard are 2 gnome ceremorphs. These guys are essentially just mini mind flayers, which is terrifying because mind flayers are pretty strong, and we'll be getting into why they're strong pretty soon here. For role-playing the gnome ceremorphs, we get the information on Vorn and Dredovex, and basically these guys were out exploring around and crashed down, and now they are trapped here, and the sole thing that they want to do is get out. They need to repair the ship and fly out of here, and unfortunately they're running out of time. If they do not do something quickly, then they're going to have to abandon ship, destroy the ship so that it doesn't get in anybody's hands, and then unfortunately they're going to have to move to one of the 10 towns and start consuming. What's unique about gnome ceremorphs is that they are not natively evil. They are in fact labeled as chaotic neutral. They just want to do their own thing. They are willing to do whatever it takes to survive, and they'll totally kill people that attack them, but they're not going to go out of their way to just, suck the brains out of your players. They shun combat, but are willing to lay the smackdown on anybody that threatens them, for sure. For role-playing the gnome squidlings, like I said, they really don't have too much going on. All they do is kind of move around and shirk on their chores, and if brains present themselves, they're going to go ahead and try and consume brains. But they are so piddly, so weak, and so pathetic looking, they really shouldn't pose any threat to anybody that actually looks at them. When they crashed down, they started sending out this SOS signal all about, and this thing goes out to a range of 50 miles, meaning that everybody in the 10 towns that is psionically inclined would be able to hear this. I'm willing to bet most groups don't have psionics in their games, but it specifically states here that you get to decide whether a non-telepathic creature can sense the signal or not. I would strongly recommend that not everyone receives these signals, or a string of random people receive these signals, and it's all kerfuffled and weird. It doesn't really show off that this is in fact an SOS signal. It should be just these people receiving these weird garbled images and sounds and not understanding what this information is and what it does. When your players arrive here, whether on accident or more than likely on purpose, they're going to see that it looks like a cephalopod with slimy, ropey tentacles as thick as tree trunks that has tried and failed to bury its immense bulk in the snow. So if you give that vague description, people might think that this thing is a giant monster, and that might just scare people away from what the actual adventure is. But if people are, feeling adventurous, then they can go ahead and look a little closer, and they can see that this thing is, technically it is kind of a large monster, but it's more so a ship. Once your players approach, they are going to be attacked by two carrion crawlers. And these carrion crawlers are going to attack with the emphasis on trying to paralyze people and drag them back to the ship. The only thing is, though, is it's really hard to telegraph that to your players that, hey, this monster is attacking you, but it's doing so, non-lethally. You are either going to have to try and sell it as the carrion crawler approaches you, politely and then slaps you with some paralyzing tentacle, or you just go ahead and say that the carrion crawler moves up to you and then just starts going back to the ship to lead you there. Because I promise you, if you just have carrion crawlers march up to the party and attack, then the players are not going to, just sit there idly. They're going to go ahead and try and murder these things. Once your players have either dealt with the carrion crawlers or the carrion crawlers have brought the players back to the ship, they're going to notice the Nautiloid features, which we have here is it's a biological construction. The ship is organic and it is creepy. The ship is slightly askew. It's a canted deck. It isn't going to affect the movement at all, but if certain liquids or rollable things are placed down, then they'll go ahead and start moving to the respective area. The ceilings are 20 feet high unless stated otherwise. The illumination, the entire place is dimly lit, so people that are normally walking blind in this whole campaign don't have to worry about, holding up their torch or casting the light cantrip. The interior doors, each interior door aboard the ship is a fleshy sphincter. If you describe it as a fleshy sphincter, then you're going to get memes for days, and it is going to be an absolute nightmare. Even more so is the fact that a door must be otherwise pried or tickled open, which requires an action. If you tell your players they have to tickle a sphincter, then it's meme central, game over. And lastly, we have life support. Currently inside, it is 50 degrees, which really sucks, but, it's not freezing. And it states here that the system gives out in 24 hours after the characters arrive. And if they don't do something about it, then the temperature is going to begin to drop 10 degrees Fahrenheit per hour until something changes. And we'll be getting into how your players could help fix that in the area. It gives us a little backstory on Nautilids. Nautilids are just bizarre flying ships that are able to let mind flayers move around the place. The thing about Nautilid ships, though, is that these things are an ancient technology, and the mind flayers have actually lost the technology to build these things, meaning that whenever one of these is lost, it's kind of a significant deal because, it's like losing an old car that doesn't get manufactured ever again. And even more so, if the Nautilid is destroyed, then the mind flayers are pretty much boned and are stuck here in the material plane, which sucks. For them, at least. For the Nautilid locations, we have Area 1, the forward deck. When your players walk up, they're going to be able to see this deck, which is somewhat buried in the snow, but that is going to let them walk onto it. And they're going to be able to see this large ballista. And you should describe this thing as looking like way cooler of a ballista than they've ever seen in defending any area in all of Iceiwnd Dale or, for that matter, the Sword Coast. This thing should be presented as, oh, it's a ballista, all right, but it looks way cooler and totally metal. When they hop on to the deck, the only way that they'll be able to see to get inside is a double door, which they must succeed on a DC 14 athletics check to get into. I've always hated the idea of having to make my players roll to go into a door when they're obviously going to go into the door anyway, but whatever. Area 2, the cargo hold. Once your players open up the door, they are going to see the horrors that await inside this ship. They're going to see the gnome squidlings meandering about the place. But most important of all, they're going to see a flesh golem. And this is not just a flesh golem stitched of humans. This is a flesh golem made from goblin, dwarf, and reindeer. You should totally describe this thing as disgusting, as furry in some places, maybe patchy beard, maybe a antler sticking out, beady nose. You should go into total Creepville and just make this thing look disgusting, because in reality it would be absolutely disgusting. It states here that if the gnome ceremorphs are not leading the party through the cargo hold, the flesh golem is just going to go ahead and start bopping into the people. The gnome squidlings, though, are going to be off to the side trying to not get into any combat. I have mixed feelings about this, because if you immediately present this place as a combat scenario, then they may just start swinging. It states here that if anybody actually kills any of the squidlings, then the gnome ceremorphs are just going to show up and just start killing people. But if they've only fought the flesh golem and or killed the flesh golem, then the gnome ceremorphs are going to be like, hey, stop it. So I would definitely have one of those moments where your players open up the door and they see this weird alien sight of 3 small weird little creatures and then this weird flesh amalgamation, and then maybe like a noise rings out, and then eventually every single one of them hears a noise coming from above of being telepathically connected to. Once your players actually get to start looking around the location, they'll be able to find heavy chains that were actually the things that actually shackled the 2 carrion crawlers, but in addition, one of the shackles carried a bullete. The bullete is going to come into a matter later, because with almost every single one of the quests in this whole adventure, every single time you try to leave a location, you always get jumped by something. In addition, your players will be able to find a staircase that leads up into other parts of the ship, but they'll also be able to find all these containers, and unfortunately, some of these containers contain a pink slurry made from humanoid brains. I can't even begin to imagine trying to describe the sights and the smells and the sounds of this place. When I ran my players through this, I told them all about how creepy this was, and all how alien and foreign this was, and it was creepy. Everyone was just on edge. And they'll be able to find, of course, these humanoid brain slurry, and they'll be able to find machine parts and weapons. And these weapons are significant because these are laser rifles. Laser rifles, if you've never used them before, are found in the DMG, and they do a tremendous amount of damage. The laser rifle has a stat of, it does 3d8 radiant damage. It has a range of 100/300. It has the reload property and is two-handed. But the thing is more often than not, players would not be proficient with laser rifles because, they've never operated a gun before, unless you're living in a higher fantasy game, I guess, then firearms would be a bit more common. But what I'm going to tell you is, once your players see these rifles, I think one thing you should do is not describe it as, oh, it's a gun, because you are telling your players it's a gun. What I think you should do is you should tell the characters that what they see are what essentially amount to, they look like metal crossbows. If you give the illusion that these things are metal crossbows, and eventually later on they find out, oh, these metal crossbows shoot magic out, then that realization of, oh, these things aren't what we're being told they are, they're actually something else, is way cooler. This harkens back to a very old school module where your players will be able to walk around and they'll be able to find a whole bunch of alien technology. But if you tell your players what they think it would be, oh, you just find metal walls and metal floors and stuff. Oh, you see a metal construct. Instead of telling your players it's a robot, telling them that it's a metal construct, just that quick little vernacular change really helps sell what they think it is. And having your player and character be on the same page, but eventually the player has that realization, is totally awesome. In Area 3, we have the Cryogenic Stasis Pods. It's here where normally throughout a long bit of travel, all of the gnome ceremorphs and gnome squidlings would go ahead and just chill in here. But they are all hands on deck and trying to help fix the ship and try and find some way to repair it. And they cannot be using it right now. Once your players climb up the stairs, they'll find themselves in Area 4, the Battle Deck. And as soon as they climb up the stairs, they'll see right in front of them another ballista. However, what's interesting about this ballista is that it is functional. So the one beforehand, you should kind of play up the fact that it's broken. This one you should play up in that it looks very functional. Maybe it's got some lights all around it. Maybe there's some little flashing doohickeys. And if someone feels the need to try and play with this thing, then you should go ahead and let them try. The firing instructions are written in Qualith, and that is not normally a language that can be taken, meaning that the only way someone would actually be able to read this thing is if they had comprehend languages up, or if they were a warlock and were able to read everything. So basically, if they didn't have these instructions at hand, you would just give them a DC 15 Arcana check to fire the weapon, and if the check fails by 5 or more, then it misfires and the bolt goes flying and totally hits someone. Hopefully your players don't get any too bright ideas on trying to use this ballista against other people, because trying to figure this thing out may cause more harm than it does good. And also the fact that it really doesn't have that big of a range of effect, because as of right now you're only in this tiny little part of the mountains and presumably there's not too much chasing after you, but who knows. In Area 5, we have Maintenance, and this is where if your players try and subvert the map by trying to sneak aboard and, hopping in and don't cause any distraction, then Dredavex, one of the gnome Ceremorphs here, is going to be found. The gnome Ceremorph has 2 items on him, a laser pistol and a psionic crystal detector. We'll be getting into the whole aspect of how these guys can be quest givers and all that in a little bit. But needless to say, this guy's got a psionic crystal detector, and it works within a 5-mile radius. And whenever something approaches, or specifically a psionic crystal approaches, then it'll be more and more rapid clicks, and you can try and find it. This is where life support can be found, and if anybody is willing to help, they have a tiny little DC of 25 Arcana to try and keep life support going for another 24 hours. 25 Arcana is next to impossible for a lot of people, even for like wizards. Like there's some wizards that aren't even proficient with Arcana, and it is one of the probably more rare skills, and intelligence is always the dump stat. And unfortunately this is going to be extremely hard, and maybe there'll be like a group check involved, or maybe you lower the DC over a period of time if you want them to actually help with life support. But if you don't care about what happens with these gnome mind flayers, then go ahead and just leave it as is. In Area 6, we have the Propulsion Room, and this is where they are going to find that they need a psionic crystal to try and stabilize the ship. Not really much to say about this area, other than as soon as your players step inside, they'll see this alien technology, and they can clearly see that there's a broken psionic crystal. In Area 7, we have the bridge, and once again, if the gnomes haven't been drawn off anywhere, then this is where you're going to find Vorin, the other gnome Ceremorph. And on him, he has a laser pistol and a pacifier rod. This pacifier rod is kind of a cool item. It basically allows you to click a button, and then any creature within 30 feet that has an intelligence score of 3 or lower has to make a DC 13 Constitution saving throw or be incapacitated for 1 minute. This is what they use to try and capture all these, dumb little animals that are running around. But it states here that there's a 25% chance that the rod breaks after every single use. What the heck? Why would you be running around with something that breaks a quarter of the time? That sucks. I understand why you can't give this to your players, because they would certainly subvert a lot of combat encounters. But, a quarter, maybe drop that down to maybe 20% at least, I guess. It's in here your players are going to be able to find the helm, and they'll be able to see this weird chair that's attached to the deck. They are not going to be able to operate it. These things just cannot be operated by things that aren't mind flayers. So any non-Illithid that sits in the chair and touches both blue orbs at once must succeed a DC 17 Constitution saving throw or be stunned for 10 whole minutes. This thing's just alien technologies just says, nah, we don't like you, and you're just stuck there. What's really cool here is we get this information on the self-destruct sequence. If your players are coming in here and wrecking shop, and the gnomes think that this place is foobar and they don't want you getting their hands on it, or if they're abandoning ship because they know that they have to leave this place to get some food, then they are going to go ahead and activate the self-destruct sequence. And once they do, there's going to be 60 seconds, a whole minute, to leave this place, and any creature within 60 feet of the ship when the explosion occurs takes 20d6 force damage. Now, 20d6 force damage isn't actually that much, because if your players come here at level like 5, let's say, and they have, 35 health, 40 health, whatever, then they're more than likely not going to get killed by this thing if they're standing inside of the ship. I find that if you're inside of something when it explodes, like, and it's supposed to be grand and you don't die from it, that's kind of lame. But, you know, if you're willing to play into that pulpiness, or if you just don't want to mess the number, that's fine. But I would personally have it where it does a little bit more damage if you're inside, and maybe when you're 30 feet away, it does a certain amount of damage. When you're 60 feet away, it does less damage, etc., etc. Your players can also find the telepathic distress beacon here, and the beacon, what's strange about this is that it's a pulsing tendril of flesh just mounted along the wall. And your players can shut this off, or once the mind flayers actually meet people, they can go ahead and turn it off themselves. Or your players can just go ahead and do what players do and hack and slash at it until it breaks. In Area 8, the Observation Deck, your players will be able to see that the deck is covered in frost. A pintle mount for a telescope is fastened near the exterior railing, but it obviously presumes that the telescope isn't there. So you should probably have, at some point, say that the gnomes use this place as an observation deck, because, you know, all they would see is just this weird little stand thing. In Area 9, we have the Captain's Quarters, and it's here where your players will be able to find a lot of cool goodies. But the issue is if they come in here and they are, you know, just hacking and slashing away, then they'll be met by 5 little, what is described as little pincers holding metal wands. These are little beams that are going to go ahead and shoot out at anybody that comes in here. And what it states is the target must succeed on a DC 16 saving throw or be struck by the gizmo's beams, taking 1d8 radiant damage. But what it's actually saying is that each of the 5 beams is shooting at the same time, meaning that that's not actually 1d8 radiant damage, that is 5d8 radiant damage. So if your players are, you know, going ahead and hacking and slashing, then the gnomes are going to go ahead and retreat into this room, and they know that as soon as people are going to start busting into the door, not only will they have their own strong abilities, they will also have the fact that these things are shooting these lasers and doing a decent amount of damage. Mind you, these things are relatively easy to break. They only have an AC of 16, and they only have 3 HP. So one little AoE and the gizmos are going to go kablooey. You could also just be a grognard, and on a successful DC 10 strength check, meaning an athletics check, your players could just run up and try and rip the thing out of the wall, which I find hilarious. In here we find a crystal sphere, but it's really just a stasis pod. This is specifically for the captain. We find a work table here, and this work table has 2 magical items on it, which is awesome. But the thing is any creature that touches this table and starts rooting around the place has a 50% chance of knocking 2 things together and causing a little electrical discharge. And whenever such electrical discharge occurs, each creature within 5 feet of the table must make a DC 17 dexterity saving throw or take 1d8 lightning damage, which admittedly isn't that bad. The 2 items we are given here are Eyes of Minute Seeing and a Helm of Telepathy. But these things come in the guise of other things, like the Eyes of Minute Seeing are a kaleidoscope lens, and the Helm of Telepathy is a slimy coif of a living space slug. Gross. So I mentioned the gnome ceremorphs are incredibly deadly, and why is that? Well, it's quite simply just because of this little Mind Blast here. The Mind Blast does 4d8 plus 4 damage, and what it does is it emits a 60-foot cone, and each creature in the area must make a DC 15 intelligence saving throw or take the damage and be stunned for a minute. Intelligence is the biggest dump stat in all of 5e. I know for a fact it is. Everyone hates using intelligence because, you know, intelligence just sucks. There's only 2 classes now that are tied to the thing. There is very few subclasses that are tied to intelligence. You know, it's just not a common thing. And a lot of people aren't proficient in the intelligence saving throw either. So it's very likely a lot of people fail the saving throw and then they're stunned. And what happens is if they're stunned, then they're just going to be sitting ducks, and then the other one can go ahead and just shoot away, or they could just run up and hit you with a tentacle. And if they hit you with the tentacle, then they're doing a bunch of damage. And when they drop you to 0, they're just going to go ahead and extract your brain, 10d10 points of damage against the creature. And if the target is reduced to 0, then they are dead. And there is not 1 but 2 gnome ceremorphs on this ship. So if 2 gnome ceremorphs go back to back and go ahead and just hit the whole party with this huge cone, then someone's going down at the bare minimum. It's just going to happen. But the gnome ceremorphs don't have any reason to kill the players unless they are totally provoked and the players just go ham and start hacking and slashing away. What I think happens here is your players are going to start making their way toward this ship, And if they have a psionic crystal in their possession, then one of them is going to notice that their psionic crystal detector is beeping. And they're going to go ahead and say, oh, hey, something's happening. Oh, and it's getting closer and it's getting closer. And then if they know for a fact that the person with a psionic crystal is getting close, they're going to go ahead and greet the players with open arms. They're going to go ahead and say, hey, you're bringing a psionic crystal. That's awesome. And the gnome Ceremorphs will go ahead and start talking to everyone, and they'll invite them on the ship, and they'll show them around, and they'll be saying, hey, we crashed down, we need your help, blah, 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 yada, yada. Can you go ahead and help us out? Oh, and hey, if you don't help us out, we're totally going to have to blow up the ship and start eating people from that town close by. And giving it that weird sensation of, oh, hey, these guys are cool, but at the same time, they're, just totally thinking of themselves, and they just want to get out of here or eat people. You can really drive in that weird alien feel. If your players go ahead and try and commit to helping, then go ahead and let them. The thing that's stated in this section, though, is that it states that they only need one psionic crystal to go ahead and save the day. The thing that sucks about that, though, is nowhere else in this entire campaign is there ever any place that's written that says that there's a psionic crystal there, except for the mine in Tourmaline. And what that means is if you agree to help them and your players don't have a psionic crystal already, then they're screwed, because what are the chances that they go to Tourmaline again? They only will receive that, detection if they go to Tourmaline again, which they may very well not. Another thing that sucks is if your group already has the psionic crystal and they come here, then they're essentially showing up to a fetch quest and they've already collected all the pelts. And that sucks because you talk to them and say, oh, hey, we need a psionic crystal. And then your group says, oh, we've got a psionic crystal. Yay, problem solved. I find that really boring as well. What I propose is if you want your players to get involved with the gnome Ceremorphs and know that if you don't appease the gnome Ceremorphs and hope to get them out of there, then people are going to start getting eaten, then you go ahead and say that the group needs 3 psionic crystals. And where are these psionic crystals found? Well, they could be anywhere. They can be found on O'Reil's abode. They can be found at any other named location. Some important NPC could have snagged one of these things, is now using their telepathy and all that stuff to do a whole bunch of crazy stuff. Play this up. Let your players roam around and explore, and as they get to town, they can go ahead and use that psionic crystal detector and say, okay, we know that there's someone in town who's got a psionic crystal. Let's go ahead and head in that direction. And that can lead to so many fun things. Something I know for sure is that there's a lot of DMs that don't like their sci-fi and their fantasy mixed. They don't like the peanut butter mixing along with the chocolate. And what I would say is if you don't want the sci-fi element of this adventure, if you don't want the laser pistols and laser rifles, and you don't even want the gnomes in here, then it's kind of hard to salvage this and try and make it more appropriate for your table. I would go ahead and say if you just straight up don't want any sci-fi element, then go ahead and ditch this whole appeal and just make it, just some meteor that fell down and maybe, a monster crawls out of the place. But if you're a little okay with some sci-fi, but you don't want to give your players some laser pistols, then go ahead and say that these mind flayers in particular have some wands that have limited charges. Go ahead and just reflavor what these laser pistols are and just make them battle wands. The idea that your players can go ahead and show up to this alien ship and have their expectations subverted by actually interacting with the aliens here and then going out and doing a little fetch quest for them, I think is pretty neat. But also the fact that these things are incredibly deadly. While they are just tiny little, squat characters and creatures, they are absolutely terrifying. They can do a tremendous amount of damage. They suck people's brains out, and they totally try and capture monsters and just have them as pets. And speaking of those pets, let's go ahead and take a look at the final part of this quest. We have Bullete Proof. Because, once again, there's so many locations in this module where your players leave and all of a sudden they get jumped by XYZ. This time it is by a Bullete. The Bullete is going to go ahead and jump the party, and it states here that the characters first notice the Bullete at 120 feet, and then when it gets within 30 feet, it springs out and uses its deadly leap. Bouletes for an early level encounter are disgusting. They do a tremendous amount of damage. They have a huge health pool. They have a high enough AC where they're going to be blocking enough blows, and their bite is super deadly. So if you have a lower level party showing up here, like level 4 in particular, they are probably going to go and die against just a single Bullete, or at least one person's going to die, because this thing's absolutely disgusting. I would say if your players are on good terms with the Gnome Ceremorphs when they leave, and the Bullete is about to jump them, then you go ahead and have one of the Gnome Ceremorphs click that little button and send that poor little Bullete packing. I think you should totally show off how powerful these guys are, not only with their own abilities, but with the items that they have at their disposal. I think this is an excellent little addition to the campaign that really can help drive in horror aspects and comedy aspects alike. These things are terrifying. As your players can see, they liquefy humanoid brains. They literally stitched apart a goblin, a dwarf, and a reindeer. But at the same time, they're going to go ahead and say, hey, buddy, you want to help us out? And, you know, that position of these things that are just willing to go ahead and talk to the players, but at the same time willing to eat them, is just, like, fascinating to me. So what happens if your players agree to help out the Gnome Ceremorphs and don't get around to doing it? And then what happens? Well, they are going to realize that, you know, we need a psionic crystal. We're not getting it. Unfortunately, we got to go ahead and blow up the ship, and we got to move to town, and we're going to start eating people. And who is on the hit list? Number 1, Dugan's Hole. Dugan's Hole is the closest settlement by, and they are going to be easy pickings. The Gnome Ceremorphs, 2 Gnome Ceremorphs are going to easily be able to handle every single commoner in the town and all the little militia that they can try and muster up, because they can just go ahead and shoot their tiny little laser pistols, and they can mind blast people, and that flesh golem can go ahead and just start punching people left, right, and center. And they'll easily be able to kill all 50 of them and have a good meal. At which point your players may go ahead and show up to Dugan's Hole at one point and discover that the town is completely empty, and sooner or later they're going to figure out why. They're going to go ahead and go into one of the houses and discover a whole bunch of liquefied brain. Gross. I like the Id Ascendant, I like the Gnome Ceremorphs, and I like the fact that your players can have so much interaction with the world by either their action or their inaction, by either helping out the Gnome Ceremorphs or by killing them and getting a whole bunch of cool loot, or by not helping them and then they go ahead and try and eat people, or, you know, your players do help them and maybe they just turn around and say, oh, maybe we're going to start studying some other creatures around here. There's so many things you can do with this, and I absolutely love it. I love the Id Ascendant, and one aspect I talked about in a episode previously was the fact that it doesn't have to be nestled up here in the mountains. I like the idea of the Id Ascendant being just anywhere, really. And I think that it crashing into one of the lakes and people are afraid of going fishing in the lakes is a really awesome idea. Maybe this thing is just directly in the water and your players go ahead and take a boat out and row there. And, you know, I like that idea as well. There's so many fun things you can do with this. And I just strongly cannot recommend it enough. Awesome stuff. And now on to another favorite location of mine. We are looking at the Jarlmoot. The Jarlmoot was a location for the giants to gather and converse. And when your players arrive, they're going to see these large seats. And also what's really cool is a stone pit in the center. And we'll be getting into all the cool stuff that your players will be able to see. But how do they get the incentive to go there? Let's go ahead and take a look. For the tall tale, we get frost giants ruled this land long ago. Their leaders, the Jarls, would meet atop a hill to the west to settle disputes. Their thrones still rest on that hill. Which, I mean, the thing is if you say that, that is totally not enough to actually get people to go there because, you know, oh, it's just a meeting place. So you should probably zhush that up a little more if you want to talk about the Jarlmoot. But we'll be getting into other ways you can incentivize your players to go there. For the quest to go there, we have Iceiwnd's Way. Iceiwnd Bloodfang is a frost druid who used to be part of the tiger tribe of the Regan nomads, but she actually decided to dip out of there, and she actually found worship in O'Real. She's known around the 10 Towns for being a wilderness guide, so presumably she's done enough work for going out with other people and exploring awesome places. And what it states here is that she actually had an avatar of the Frostmaiden appear in front of her and say, hey, you're going to take the PCs out to the Jarlmoot and you're going to get them killed. Iceiwnd is going to go ahead and offer her services and take the players to the Jarlmoot for the measly cost of 25 gold. and she's gonna jush it all up. She's gonna say, "Oh yeah, the Jarlmoot. It's a circle of giant thrones on a haunted hilltop, and if we go on nights of a full moon, you can see the spirit of Rega Yarva, and will open up a treasure vault to anyone who defeats his champion." That is a way cooler incentive to get players to come here, saying, "Oh yeah, you know, there's a champion you can fight, and if you defeat them, you can get some cool loot." Like, that sounds awesome. Later on here, it says that Iceiwnd knows the way to Jarlmoot and is going to direct them there, but she is not going to go ahead and show off her work. She's not going to help in any combats that arise before then. She's not going to help during the combat that happens at Jarlmoot. But once the combat is done, she's going to go ahead and try and kill people in a weakened state. In addition to the sad but ultimately inevitable betrayal, a winter wolf also appears and joins in on the fray. I like this tie-in a lot more to the area. I think just telling your players, "Oh, some giants used to meet there a while ago," that's probably not a good enough incentive. A lot of people will just think, "Oh, you know, that's just where giants used to meet." You know, probably not good enough incentive. But if you tell them specifically that there's like giant seats there, and there's a stone pit, and anybody that's ever gone there has seen flocks of ravens floating around, I think that's a way cooler incentive to get the more exploratory people there. Some of the ways you can get your players to go to the Jarlmoot: they can hear about epic tales of giants blowing on a horn. They can hear about this horn was able to devastate all those in its wake, and it is believed that this horn is currently at the resting place of Jarlmoot. Basically, spreading a little rumor that there is a horn of blasting to be found in the Jarlmoot is a really great incentive, because they can certainly be looking forward to using a really powerful device, and we will be getting into some things you can do with that horn of blasting once we take a look at the area. Another tie-in here could be good old Bitey at Bryn Shander, could be singing a song and maybe have a couple of stanzas saying, "Hey, down the river's flow, there's the giant's place where they like to, you know, blow," I guess. There could be a lot of, you know, you can make up something on your own, or maybe you can find something, but there is obviously, you can incentivize your players to go there if old Bitey, you know, sings about it. And lastly, if you have anybody that either has a giant background to some degree or a ragged nomad background to some degree, they can definitely be clued in on Jarlmoot and saying that this is a place to test oneself, to test one's mettle, and to overcome adversity, and, you know, get into a fight that they can truly show who they are. And that alone could go ahead and prompt some people to going to the Jarlmoot and getting into a fight with the Giants champion. So hopefully between all those, you can incentivize your players enough to go ahead and go down the river and go to the Jarlmoot. And let's go ahead and dive into what makes this place so cool looking. This is what makes this place so cool looking. The art, once again, does not fail to deliver. This looks so epic. Just the sheer size and scale of it. Your players arrive at this location and they're looking up at the spirits of giants all around, and these things tower over them, but they just stare and watch and wait, and maybe look pissed, of course, but just the imagery alone of you slap this down on the table and you explain to them, "Oh, there's all these giant spirits," so good looking. And just like the fact that your players are so insignificant and small compared to these creatures is fascinating to me. It's awe-inspiring, really. Once your players arrive at the Jarlmoot, they'll be able to see that resting atop a hill, they see 7 humongous giant seats, basically carved out of stone slabs. They'll also be able to see humongous swarms of ravens constantly swirling overhead, and that really leads to the ominous and creepiness of this location. The thing about this location, though, is that it specifically states that the magic only happens here if they come on a night of the full moon. I would go ahead and, once again, you know, just go ahead and play it up if you really want that time aspect in this game to be present. But if you just want your players to go ahead and adventure, then just go ahead and just tell them, "Oh, this stuff only happens at night." Simple as that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and go into the named locations here. In Area 1, we have the Ring of Thrones. Kind of, you know, Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones smashed together. The Ring of Thrones is, once your players, you know, go ahead and pass through one of these seats here, they'll find themselves in the ring, and that is when all of those apparitions are going to appear. We get some really good information on all these giants. 3 of the giants have fur vest and leather trousers. 3 others wear chainmail from head to toe. And the 7th giant, who is clearly their leader, Rhaegar Yarva, is slightly larger than the others and wears a coat of white dragon scales and a magnificent horned helm. Really awesome stuff. If you have any of those nerds in your group that always say, I cast detect magic, well, they're going to discover that these thrones emit necromancy, and that will certainly be terrifying for some people. And what's also terrifying is the fact that they'll be able to discover that anybody that does not have resistance or immunity to cold damage will gain vulnerability to cold damage, which thankfully is not that bad for the first couple of fights, but it could prove absolutely deadly against the Winterwolf that jumps them later. Once your players step into the ring, they'll look around and see all these apparitions appear, and they're just going to be silently judging and waiting. And they're going to see Rhaegar Yarva barely flick his finger. Then all of a sudden, a frost giant skeleton is going to appear, and it's going to prompt an epic battle inside the arena. Your players are going to do battle with this epically large undead creature, and once they finally down it, then Rhaegar Yarva is going to flick his finger again, and 2 invisible stalkers are going to appear, question mark? They don't actually appear, they're just there, and they're going to start punching people. And invisible stalkers are really tough if your group isn't well spec'd for it, if your group doesn't have any way to deal with it other than just attacking with disadvantage. But hopefully, you know, your group is covered for a lot of things. Hopefully they got some good AoEs. Hopefully someone's got fairy fire in there. Who knows? Because as a friendly reminder, if something is invisible and it attacks, it will always have advantage. And if you are attacking something that's invisible, you always have disadvantage. And these things have a pretty decent sized health pool, and attacking with disadvantage you're going to miss a lot of the time. And these things have a +6 to hit, and they're going to be attacking with advantage. They're going to hit a lot of the time. And this is absolutely terrifying for lower level parties. So if you don't want to add to the deadliness of this campaign, and you definitely don't want your players to get mollywopped by a frost giant skeleton and then invisible stalkers, and then potentially later even more betrayal and all that stuff, I would go ahead and either allude to the fact that this is definitely a fight that their players are going to get into, so at least they can prepare for it. And also, if you're not wanting to kill people nearly as bad, you can go ahead and just remove one of the invisible stalkers, because 2 invisible stalkers is incredibly deadly. These things are just punching people left, right, and center, and, you know, presumably not getting hit nearly as often. And even when they do get hit, so what? They have a huge health pool. So adjust this battle accordingly as you need to, because lower level parties, even 5th level parties, are probably going to have a terrible time with this. Once your players have defeated the giant skeleton and the invisible stalkers, then Rhaegar Yarva is going to be pleased and maybe put on, maybe not a smile, but sort of like a toothy, you know, battle grin. And what's going to happen from there is all the giants are going to be intoning a certain giant magic, and then Rhaegar Yarva is going to disappear, he's going to fade from his throne, and it's going to reveal the hidden staircase that leads down below, and that is going to lead us to all of the fun swag below. It states here that once the characters have defeated them and Rhaegar Yarva's throne rises into the air, that is when Iceiwnd Bloodfang and the Winterwolf are going to strike. Presumably, if you have, once again, a lower level party, this fight is already going to be deadly against the Frost Giant Skeleton and against the 2 invisible stalkers. And then just having a druid and a Winterwolf come in and betray the party is way too much, honestly. They're not going to have enough time to heal up. They're not going to have really enough time to, you know, maybe they've used a lot of their resources, and that's going to be miserable. Specifically because if the Winterwolf hops in and the Winterwolf does its breath, everyone has vulnerability to the breath attack, and that is totally going to murk some people. So once again, lay off the betrayal a little bit, maybe if you don't want that. Lay off the combat a little bit. Maybe something else happens. I like the idea of Iceiwnd betraying the party, seeing all this, and then Rhaegar Yarva shows up again. He's like, nah, screw this betrayal stuff, and summons a Frost Giant Skeleton to beat her up and the Frostwolf. I think that would certainly be sort of like a showing to the players that, hey, You know, it's all about nobility and strength. It's not about deceitfulness and backstabbing. It also states here that once the moon disappears around the horizon, the Rhaegar Yarva's throne slowly lowers back into place, sealing the vault once more, meaning that if your players spend way too long downstairs, then they could potentially get trapped, unless, of course, they please Rhaegar Yarva again. Hopefully, your players don't spend too long in here because, honestly, they don't need to spend that long. Your players head down the stairs and they'll find the Area 2 Hall of Braziers. Once inside, they're going to see, of course, all these braziers. They're going to see a double door, and they're going to see a portcullis. And the portcullis, they cannot walk through. It's too tight. However, creative characters might decide to teleport through the portcullis, trying to get past all the little stuff that you have to do. But we'll get into why that is a bad idea in a moment. There is an inscription in an arch above the braziers, and there's something written in the Dwarvish alphabet. And unfortunately, what this means is if you have no one that has Dwarvish in the entire party, then there is literally no way that they'd be able to actually do what needs to be done here. So that sucks. So go ahead, and if you have literally no one in the party speak Dwarvish, then go ahead and just say it's written in common, whatever. But if you do have someone who has, Dwarvish or Giant, then you can go ahead and give it to them. And that poem reads out, "Snatch a scale from a sleeping worm, against the blowing wind stand firm. Climb a mountain with a stone in your shoe. On a little feet, death comes for you. Be the arrow that starts the war. Let life's blood fall till it falls no more." The thing about this is I talked about this in a video a while back, but I hate when you translate something and it rhymes. That doesn't make any sense. When you translate anything from any other language, it will never rhyme ever. That's not how that works. They do this in video games, movies, TV shows all the time, and I hate it. But, rant over, whatever. What this poem is saying is, specifically, they need to grab some materials, one for each line of this poem, and to drop this item into the brazier, and the brazier is going to light up. And once the brazier is lit up, then your players will be able to walk through the portcullis. For little features of this room, we have the double door, which states that it leads to Area 5, and your players have to make a DC 15 athletics check to make their way inside. Once again, just have 2 people open up this door. No check required, because what's the point of rolling dice? We have the lock gate, and it states here that it's too small for small or medium creatures to squeeze through. Easy peasy. And we have, of course, the stone braziers. And what's cool is written above each of these are these symbols that dedicate to each one. Unfortunately, in Roll20 here, it looks like we don't get these symbols. But if you have the book, as you can see here, you get these cool little symbols, which you can go ahead and show off to your players, which I think really adds to the neatness and, aesthetic of the adventure. So it's here where we learn all the information on what they need to drop into each one of the braziers. They need to drop a dragon scale into the worm. They need to blow air into the wind. They need to drop a stone or a pebble from a mountain in Fiel. They need a dead creature for Dodd. They need an arrow for a Crig. And they need drops of blood from a living creature in Live. So your players aren't probably normally going to be walking around with, dragon scales or stones from a mountain, etc., etc. But thankfully, your players can find all of this in the next area. For some reason, even though you players would go to Area 5 first more often than not, they decided to have Area 3 and 4 be these other locations. So let's go ahead and take a look at these. Area 3, nothing too fancy going on here. The curved tunnel, your players are just simply going to walk through here and find another set of double doors, which they can open up with a DC 15 athletics check, whatever. In Area 4, we have Turn the Gold Key, ? Once your players arrive inside, they'll be able to see that there is a chest, and inside of it, or at least in the lock, there is already a key jutting out of it. So this is to basically punish people that try and subvert the ritual. If anybody tries to teleport into the area and, doesn't light up the braziers, they're going to see this chest with a key and think to themselves, oh yeah, let's go ahead and open it. Maybe someone was about to open it and then something happened. Unfortunately, turning this key sucks because if you turn the gold key and the lock doesn't unlock the chest, instead conjures a 10-foot square doorway through which the area J1 can be seen, so just outside. And your players may think that this is like the reward to some degree, and they'll go ahead and presumably walk through. And if they do, then unfortunately 4 swarms of ravens are going to swoop down and attack whoever walked through the door. Having 4 swarms of ravens beat down on you for trying to subvert the little area here is pretty funny. It can theoretically be deadly if it's a single person, and specifically it's like a squishier person with low AC, because ravens, they can do a whopping 2d6 points of damage, and if there's 4 swarms attacking, then it could be deadly. But hopefully you have a group that can handle a swarm of ravens, and hopefully you don't have anybody trying to, cheat their way through this little area. Players could decide to not use the gold key and try and open up this thing using their thieves tools, in which case they'll just be a DC 20 dexterity check after they pull the gold key out, and not too terrible, to be expected for finding some good loot. A knock spell will also open up this chest, no problem. And once the chest is opened, they'll be able to see that inside of the chest is the Horn of Blasting. However, stacked around the horn are 6 flying battle axes that attack as soon as the lid opens. Which, I don't know how to feel about that. Your players are supposed to come here and get loot, and you theoretically can do everything right and still get attacked. I think that the flying battle axes should be reserved for people trying to break into the chest, not people that actually use the actual gold key. But tailor this adventure to your own group, of course. Now on to the way your players are supposed to handle this quest. We have Area 5, the Chamber of Chest. As soon as your players open up these double doors, they'll be able to see these massive chests, clearly designed for giants. But the keys are hanging on a hook in the middle of the ceiling, and unfortunately, players aren't going to be able to just, reach up and grab them. They're going to have to get a little creative. It states here even Mage Hand is too weak to grab these keys because they're just so big and heavy. So people are going to have to get a little creative. They can go ahead and stack the chest, or they can, go ahead and do a circus act and have everyone stand on each other's shoulders. You can do a lot of crazy things and reward creativity for going and climbing up and getting these keys. Your players don't necessarily need to get all the keys to open up these chests, though. They could go ahead and use Thieves' Tools, which is only a DC 15 dexterity check, or they could use a knock spell or a similar magic. Once your players open up all the chests, they'll be able to find the following: an elven arrow, a dead snowy owl frozen stiff, a gleaming scale from a young white dragon, and a fist-sized stone from Kelvin's cairn. With these objects in hand, that is more than enough to complete the ritual in Area 2. The only thing that is missing here is they need to breathe on one of the braziers, easy peasy, and they need to bleed on another one. Just simply poke your finger real quick, no HP loss required, just a little bit of blood, easy peasy. Once your players have all the items, they are able to drop them into Area 2 and light up the braziers, at which point the portcullis will lower down, and your players are able to walk through Area 3, go to Area 4, and they'll have a gold key, and they'll look at the chest and see that there's already a gold key in the chest. So they'll probably, hopefully think to themselves, we've got a gold key here, and there's already a gold key in there. Let's go ahead and use our key. If they don't, then, as stated before, if they've used the key that's already in the chest, then they're going to open up the gate, and the gate's going to teleport them outside, and they will get swarmed by swarms of ravens. Not that big of a deal. Hopefully they use their key. As I just mentioned, of course, I think you should reward your players for doing the absolute right thing and not have them get ambushed by the flying axes. But if they use the other key or they use magic to try and open up this thing, then go ahead and have the battle axes fly up and attack whoever tries to steal from this epic little area. Once again, we are so graced by given a area that states, when the players leave, this happens. Here it states that a frost giant, Gromengorn, is hostile and has noble blood in her icy veins. She is showing up to prove her worth, and it just so happens she's showing up exactly after your players have gone through all this. And she is going to go ahead and attack the party, and if she sees anybody with the Horn of Blasting, she's going to go ahead and dunk on them. And once again, why? Why is there so many quests where you leave the area and you're just at the right place at the right time to get jumped? Like, that is just... I hate coincidences. It's just way too often. It just happens way too much. I think a cooler spin on this is Gromengorn is already at this location when your players arrive, and so they're the ones actually, stepping in on someone else's territory. And Gromangorn is going to go ahead and be like, no, I will prove myself. I don't want you guys in the way. And your players can either try and join in with Gromangorn and have some type of roleplay interaction where Gromangorn is going to test herself against the spirits, so your players can see that a frost giant skeleton is going to appear and an invisible swarm is going to appear. Or your players can try and convince the giant that, hey, you know, we'll fight alongside you and all that fun stuff. I think that's a way cooler spin than just, oh, Gromangorn appears and Gromangorn attacks. We do get some cool information that Gromangorn wields a 10-foot long chain with an anvil bolted to the end of it, and this thing does 3d12 plus 6 damage. It's like, I think that's totally epic. But unfortunately, like many online supplements, we don't get any cool art of that. We just get simply a little circle here and the name. So if you haven't already had a lot of these locations where something shows up right after your players are leaving, then go ahead and run it as is. It's fine. But if you've had that happen multiple times, which is very likely if you're running a lot of the adventures in this module, then I would go ahead and once again suggest changing it up. Maybe she just doesn't show up at all. Maybe she shows up and it's not a combat encounter. Maybe she says, you know, if you guys are able to do it, I'm going to do it even better. I'm going to do it by myself. And your players can go ahead and watch this. And another thing to consider is we get this information on Gromangorn, but we don't understand who this person actually is or where they came from. What are they doing? And what are they going to do once they've proven themselves? Where are they going to go? The frost giants are very few and far between here left in the icy north, and I suspect that Gromangorn is, you know, one of the last of her kind. So go ahead and play that up, that she is trying to prove herself, that she is going to try and bring forth, you know, the epic giant kingdom that once was, and this is the first step of many things she has to do to try and, you know, resurrect the giant kingdom. For such a small area, we have a lot of combat going on. Your players can go up against a frost giant skeleton, 2 invisible stalkers, a frost druid and a winter wolf, swarms of ravens, and a frost giant. That is a lot of combat in a small amount of time, and unfortunately, lower level groups are going to be dunked, especially if they don't, you know, actually rest in the meantime. Which, for the most of those fights, you don't get a rest in the meantime. So you have a lower level group, go ahead and nerf things down a little bit, lower those HP pools, lower that damage a little bit, lower the numbers if you have to. But I think a levels, you know, 6, 7, 8 group can definitely handle this a lot better. Now onto the reward. A Horn of Blasting is dope. What I'm going to go ahead and say is, of course we get this art of a Horn of Blasting, but that kind of makes me not think of the frozen north if you see, you know, bright orangey colors and a lion's head. I would go ahead and reflavor the Horn of Blasting as looking like its giant head, you know, screaming, and maybe there's some runic symbols in the side, and make it more dulled and grayed colors. Make it look more like it belongs here in the frozen north. The Horn of Blasting is a dope item to give to your players. I love giving it to my players purely because it can blow up in their faces. But the reason why it's really cool is the fact that each creature in a cone of 30 feet that you shoot in front of you must succeed on a Constitution saving throw of DC 15 or take 5d6 thunder damage and is deafened. On a successful save, the creature takes half the damage and is not deafened. But what's really cool about this, and I know for a fact the reason why they put it in this adventure, is creatures and objects made of glass or crystal have disadvantage on saving throws and take 10d6 thunder damage instead of 5d6. There is 2 major characters your players are going to come across that are creatures that are made of glass and or crystal. The first one being the Iceiwnd Dragon. That dragon is essentially made out of crystal and thus would have disadvantage on the saving throw and take 10d6 thunder damage, which is huge. Your players are going to need serious help dealing with that dragon. The second creature your players will be going up against in this campaign is O'Reilly herself. In her second form, the Brittle Maiden, she will be made essentially of glass. And you can totally flavor that as, you know, she's made of glass and thus has disadvantage on the saving throw and takes the extra damage, which can be super duper helpful. The thing is though, is if your players try and tune this horn way too often, then unfortunately it will blow up in their faces at some point. Each time the horn's magic is used, there's a 20% chance of causing the horn to explode, and the explosion deals 10d6 fire damage to the blower and destroys the horn. So you should totally tell your players that, yeah, this thing is powerful, but don't use it willy-nilly. Don't use it in every single combat encounter, or else you will either one, accidentally kill yourself, or two, the worst case scenario, destroy the magic item for the party. I like the Jarlmoot. I love, ancient Nordic runic stuff. I love the aesthetic. I love the feel. I like the symbology of Vikings and all that stuff. I think it's great, and you can definitely play that up around here as well. You can play up the nobility of the giants and having them have a air quote fair fight or a tough fight, and of course punishing those that would do otherwise. You can do so many things with this, but unfortunately, if you have a lower level group here, you're going to have to change the encounters here because, once again, this is just a TPK waiting to happen. Some changes I think you can make to the quest here is Iceiwnd is a known guide, and I think to that degree, your players should have already heard of Iceiwnd before just coming on this quest, instead of just saying, oh yeah, there's that famous Iceiwnd person, yada yada. I think what you should do is introduce Iceiwnd into the campaign early and have her befriend the group and maybe even take them out on some expedition somewhere. But at some point, Iceiwnd is a Oriel worshiper, and at some point Oriel is going to show up and say, hey, those people you've been hanging out with, yeah, you're going to need to kill them. So go ahead and take them to that Jarlmoot over there. I think that betrayal over time is way more fun than just sudden betrayal. But that's just me. Another thing I think you should change is, of course, the flying battle axes attacking whoever opens up the chest, even if they use the correct key and they totally do the ritual just fine. I think that, punishing people that, cheat, I think that's perfectly fine. But I think people going out of their way to actually do the correct thing and do this awesome little ritual, they should totally be rewarded for that. And you honestly don't need to add any more combat encounters to this area than there already is. And of course, the last thing I would change is Gromangorn just showing up and attacking the party. Frost Giants are incredibly strong, and a single attack is probably going to be enough to down a lot of people, and Frost Giants attack twice. So definitely consider the level and scale of your campaign and how much your players can handle. I think the Jarlmoot adds a lot to any campaign, and I think that Horn of Blasting is incredibly powerful and is going to be super useful for two of the major mainstay fights of this campaign. So go ahead and maybe allude to the Horn of Blasting should you desire, and definitely tell them, hey, once they have the Horn of Blasting, don't go blowing that thing willy-nilly and, screwing your chances for the fights to come. I totally recommend seeding Jarlmoot into your campaign, maybe early-ish, but tell them, hey, there could be something deadly waiting for you there.